This short report focuses on 2 mission challenges, highlighting 2 trends that need to be overcome for this church to complete the proclamation of the 3 angels' messages. The first is one that I have highlighted at annual council every year since I came to this position. It relates to attrition and loss. The second challenge is an issue I touched on briefly last year, but will explore more in this report. It is the leveling off of growth rates, a trend which, if it were to continue, could have very troubling implications. So, the first mission challenge relates to reductions in membership, the second to what seems to be a diminishing success in adding members. This first chart shows accessions per annum in the 2010s. It is a crucial metric, and we will come back to it, but of course it's not the only metric affecting church growth. Compare these figures to those for losses in this chart, which shows losses for the same period and on the same scale. These are members who were dropped from membership, were identified as missing, or simply could not be accounted for in audits. You will note the high numbers in the preceding quinquennium as comprehensive membership reviews took place in many parts of the world, and yet in mid-decade that faltered. Thank you to church leaders who, in the last 2 to 3 years, have taken up membership review with renewed vigor. I want to pay particular tribute to our leaders in the Southern Asia Division who are undertaking the first major division-wide audit of membership. When church members turn their backs on the church and, as it were, hit the road, of course it has an impact on growth. This chart illustrates that impact by charting losses together with net accessions. You can see how the losses literally undercut the gains. So much so that there are places in every division where church leaders prefer simply not to record the losses. But the people are leaving. Closing our eyes to that is no substitute for closing the back door. Starting in 1965, the church counted not only baptisms and professions of faith, but also losses. And thus we now have 55 years of statistics on losses. This is the 5th year of showing versions of the next 2 slides, but each year I update the data. Since 1965, exactly 40,421,554 people have been members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Thanks be to God. Tragically, the number who have left has now passed 16 million. And our net loss rate has now ticked over above 40%. In the last 55 years, then, of the 40.4 million church members, at least 16.24 million have left. So there is the first challenge, reducing losses. Let us now turn to the second challenging trend. We are not having the evangelistic success that might be expected. Now, please be clear. I will be talking in the next few minutes about decreases in accessions and the accession rate, not about decreases in membership. But if the trend were to continue, it could have a significant negative impact on growth. Highlighting it now means there's the possibility of taking remedial action before the trend becomes very serious. Now, this slide shows the world growth rate for the past quinquennium. And as you look at it, you'll see that on the face of it, there is an obvious problem. But ongoing comprehensive membership reviews distort the growth rate. Many of those taken off the books, or in these days off the databases, actually left the church years, even decades ago. So the most reliable metric we currently have is accessions, because we do have confidence that baptisms, rebaptisms, and professions of faith are being reported pretty accurately. And of course, accessions are the headline in considering growth. So let's look at this chart again. It shows actual numbers of accessions each year through the 2010s. Now, there's a considerable up and down in the annual figures for accessions, which of course is baptisms and professions of faith. There is no trend of consistently increasing growth in the number of accessions, but the church is growing, increasing every year. and we might reasonably expect that net accessions would regularly be increasing too. Yet they are not. And that becomes clearer when we look not at actual numbers, but at rates of increase and decrease. And if we look not at 10 years, but at 20 years, as in this chart. Again, let me stress, we are talking about accessions, not about membership. What we see here is therefore not a growth rate, but it does show the percentage increase or decrease in accessions each year. There's considerable volatility, which is to be expected. But it is striking that in 10 of the 20 years, accessions were lower than in the preceding 12 months. And yet remember, the church membership has increased in all 20 years. We might expect a couple of years in which accessions declined, but not 10 of 20. Our success in soul winning seems to be plateauing. We have more members than ever, but they are not winning noticeably more souls for Christ. There could be many reasons for that, but one I want to highlight is related to what should be powering the world church growth, church planting. As we all know, the more local churches we have, the greater presence in a community we have, the more opportunities we have to help people understand the Bible and find freedom, healing, and hope in Jesus. Let me underscore that in the next 4 charts, I will be giving figures for congregations, which is the combined total of local churches and companies. Now, this chart shows a steady rise in the global number of congregations. Again, this slide shows data for 20 years, and we see a steady increase. To God be the glory. But the chart shows the net numbers. We get a different picture when we look at the rate of increase in the total number of congregations, what we might call a congregational growth rate, which you see here. What this chart shows is that in the last 20 years, there has never been a year in which the number of congregations declined, but that the rate of increase has steadily declined. Now, this is a correlation. It is not clear that the slowing of church planting is the cause of the plateauing in conversions, but it certainly can't help. I suggest, however, that there is a twofold problem. First, church planting needs to be strengthened, and indeed that is emphasized in the I Will Go strategic focus. But secondly, congregations need to become more effective in outreach. This chart shows the number of accessions per congregation, and again for the last 20 years. In 1999, each congregation on average added 12 new members, and that reflected, I'm sure, the impact of the various net series. Since 2008, the accessions per congregation has hovered just above or just below 8. What is the trend? This chart takes the same data but shows a logarithmic trend line, and the direction over the last 2 decades is plain. Here is one last indicator. This chart shows accessions per pastor, each year for the same 20-year period. The dark blue line shows the average number of accessions per ordained pastor. The orange line shows the average for all pastors, ordained, commissioned, and licensed. The trend line here would also be down, though less markedly down than for accessions per congregation. Now, it's notable that there are encouraging spikes in the 2010s, but again, though we have more pastors than ever, they are not, it seems, winning ever more souls for Christ. And again, here there could be a number of reasons for all the data and the analysis that I have shared. But it does prompt me to ask 2 questions, and they both relate to the challenges I have discussed. First, are we giving our local church members effective training in holistic disciple making? And second, is it possible that we, collectively, as church leaders around the world, have simply come to take growth for granted? Have we become complacent? These data tell us that there is no room for complacency. As I conclude, I am going beyond the data, but I want to suggest that holistic discipleship and disciple making will help us to resolve both problematic areas, because that includes nurturing and retaining members and motivating them and equipping them to reach out to others, to share with other people the prophetic truths that we hold dear, that point to Jesus Christ and that are epitomized in Revelation chapter 14. That is our mission.